Hey there, during this episode, we're going to explore a topic that's very concerning to an awful lot of people. Aging, we all hope we get older, and memory. Everybody wants to keep their memory. Are there things we can do to help our memory? Well, my guest today is Dr. John Lewis, and he has done a tremendous amount of research, in fact, headed up over 30 trials, research trials, on a variety of topics concerning aging, nutrition, and mental health. So we're going to learn a lot from him today, including things that he's developed to take them into, maybe help us with this as we get older. So welcome, Dr. Lewis.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Okay, so tell me, aging and nutrition. Do our nutrition requirements change over the years as we get older?
This is a great question. If you look at it from a few key nutrients, I would say probably. So for example, protein. And of course, protein is a big hot topic right now, thanks to RFK's new dietary guidelines, which I don't agree with, but this hyper over-sensationalization about protein to me is a bit misplaced and misguided. Nonetheless, it is true though, as we age, we produce less hydrochloric acid in our stomach. And so it is thought that, older people, once we cross middle age, we probably need a little bit more protein. The counter to that though, Diane, is that 75 to 80% of Americans are almost totally sedentary. So I asked the protein pushing crowd, why does a sedentary person need all of this extra protein? If you're a bodybuilder, if you're a drug using bodybuilder, if you're a professional athlete, if you're a drug using professional athlete, if you have wasting disease from HIV or something else, if you've been severely burned, okay, I'm right there with you. Load up on protein. Your body needs those amino acids to either deal with the stress of competition and the use of drugs, or if you have some sort of trauma or disease that would necessitate that. Otherwise, the average middle-aged person, or even a little younger than middle-aged, sitting around all day in an office or at home, my goodness, you don't need to be eating 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. That's ridiculous.
I'm happy to hear that. I've never been able to get that much in.
Well, exactly. I mean, you just have to sit around eating beef and pork and chicken all day and taking grams and big scoops of protein powder all day. I mean, the average person can't. I eat maybe 50 to 60 grams of protein per day, and I think that's more than enough for me. I'm a former drug-free competitive bodybuilder. I still lift like a bodybuilder. I just don't get in a bikini and get on stage in front of people anymore. But for me, I think 50 to 60 grams of protein every day is more than enough for me. Show me any evidence. You and I could go to any hospital of your choosing in this country. We could walk into an inpatient unit. I guarantee you there's not one person in there suffering from protein deficiency.
It's so funny you mentioned bodybuilding. I'm dating myself here. I remember very vividly the Franco Columbu Arnold, but wasn't his name Andreas Callas or something like that? He was the vegetarian bodybuilder that was like just as big as all those guys.
Right, exactly. Well, this is my 27th year of eating a plant-based diet. I was not vegan when I was still competing in bodybuilding, but I mean, I'm 6 feet tall, 210 pounds. I have very low body fat. Again, I'm not ready to...
very healthy.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not in competition level of, 3% fat like when I was competing, but I could do that again if I was that big of a narcissist and I had nothing better with my time to do than, plan for a new bodybuilding competition. I just don't find that lifestyle to be healthy. That was one of the 2 reasons why I got out of it. The other reason was because I couldn't see myself making a living doing it.
So protein might not be as hyped. It's definitely hyped. We're seeing that all over the internet now, except for those certain categories that you mentioned, those 4 different groups of people. What do you think becomes more nutritionally important with age?
Well, you can, so again, looking at the data, roughly 70% of Americans are either insufficient or deficient in their vitamin D status. So let's think about vitamin D for a second. First of all, most people that are knowledgeable in biochemistry say, well, you know what? It's not really a vitamin. It's more like a prohormone. And of course, it's the one essential nutrient that we need where we get UV, like I'm looking at my window here, UVB exposure from the sun, and then our body's amazing inherent intelligence converts that into vitamin D. So I get it for people that are living in, Minnesota or Montana or Alaska, the northern latitudes. For those folks, clearly sun exposure is an issue. For those of us living in the Sun Belt, like us here in South Florida, we don't really have an excuse. I mean, we get sunshine every day. Even still, something like a vitamin D3 supplement is dirt cheap. I mean, compared to a lot of other products on the market, there is no excuse for 70% of Americans to be deficient or insufficient in their vitamin D. And we already know as a scientific community that it interacts with over 4,500 of our roughly 30 to 40,000 genes. So imagine that. I mean, this is way beyond bone health. This is literally head to toe coverage of how important vitamin D is. And so as we get older, to circle all the way back around to your question, if you are insufficient or deficient on your vitamin D status, you're setting yourself up for everything: neurodegeneration, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, osteoporosis, liver disease, bone, I mean, you name it, the whole thing.
Can you talk about the connection between vitamin D and K?
There's a very big connection. Yes, exactly. And so you should, if you are taking D3, you definitely need a product that has K2 along with it. So they work very harmoniously together. And what do? The K2 actually works with D3 to help push calcium into your bones. You don't want calcium floating around in your bloodstream where you can actually have the phenomenon of atherosclerosis. You want the calcium to get into your bones where it really can do its best job. And so that's the synergistic role between D3 and K2, and that's why you should look for a product where you can take those both together.
You know, and we're going to talk about some products that you recommend at some point, but what I want to get into is with aging. We talked about you definitely don't need most likely the amount of protein being recommended. I recently read a study about fiber actually having a big impact on memory. Can you talk to that at all? And what kind of fiber are we talking about?
Well, so again, going back to this movement, if you want to call it that, over the last few years of these people pushing all of this animal food, primarily protein and fat, well, guess what? Animal tissue is completely devoid of fiber, so you're not getting any fiber there. And then this same group of people they're basically trying to make the argument that fiber is irrelevant, like there's no beneficial role for fiber. I'm not actually, quite frankly, I'm not even aware of that study that you just found looking at the relationship between fiber and memory. But what we do know very clearly from many, many years of study is that if you eat more fiber, you're helping to pull out stuff that you do not want sitting in your gut. There's a concept called transit time, which is the amount of time from when you stick something in your mouth to when it goes out the other side. And the faster you have a transit time, the more you're able to pull the stuff out, the metabolites, even toxins that get broken down, all these different things that we do not want sitting in our gut for a long time. We want to get that stuff out as quickly as possible. And so digestible and non-digestible fiber from vegetables, fruits, and grains, those are the kinds of materials that we need to help make that happen. And so that's very important. Again, I was not aware of the memory study, but at least in terms of helping us to reduce our risk of colorectal cancer, that's very important. And again, unfortunately, the average American is eating practically no fiber every day.
If you were to guide someone on, first let's talk about how you imagine an ideal diet, and then let's look at ways that it could be supplemented based on some of the research you've done. But I'd like to look at what's an ideal diet just to start with from your perspective and what you've studied.
Okay, well, again, this is my 27th year of eating a plant-based diet. So the carnivore, paleo, keto crowd, they don't like me. You know, they think, oh, you're crazy. You know, have you heard this statement that they tend to make? Plants are trying to kill you. What in the world does that mean?
I've heard people say you've got to cut your vegetable quantity, and I'm basically a vegetarian since I was 27. So it's been pretty much a pretty long time. I'm 65 now, and it's treated me very well. I get great blood work. But one thing about people who have plant-based diets, a lot of them are often, though, not very healthy looking, because they're not sticking with the plant base. They're eating a lot of stuff to fill in the energy they want. So they're eating a lot of refined carbohydrates. You see that too. So I can see why the pendulums swing in different directions.
But Diane, the thing is, and this is what cracks me up. The thing, when people say, well, oh, look at him, I'm not saying look at me. I'm saying, you
look pretty good. We can acknowledge that. You look healthy. You look strong.
No, but I'm saying, like, you know how many times the protein pusher points to somebody that's, thin and looks dilapidated and looks like anemic and all these things, and they point out that person, well, it's because he is vegan or vegetarian or whatever. However, as far as the data go, there is maybe 1% of the American population who is self-classifying as either vegan or vegetarian. 1%. 70% of Americans have obesity or overweight, type 2 diabetes, some form of cancer, some form of heart disease, depression, bone disease, liver disease, kidney disease, on and on and on. How in the world does 1% of the population drive 70% of our population with all this chronic disease? It doesn't. So what in the world explains 70% of our population being essentially sick? It's because they're eating all these animals and animal tissues. It's not because they're vegan and vegetarian. It's because they're eating all this stuff. I mean, it's
do you think it's just the animal protein, or do you think it's, an over-reliance on highly manufactured processed foods? Where do you think that comes into play?
I think it's both. Clearly, we have, as Michael Pollan said many, many years ago in one of his first books, if not his first book, we eat food-like substances, right? Like whether you're, whatever you classify yourself as, the average person is eating these food-like substances that don't really look anything like what they looked like in Mother Nature when they were either on a tree or you pull them out of the soil or they were on a bush or something. And so we've completely converted from 100 years ago. I can imagine what my grandparents, they're all gone now, but I can imagine when they were young children 100 years ago, what they were eating and how different their lives were in terms of food compared to my life and even your life and, people now and younger generations. It's completely different. And then, of course, add on top of that all of the changes that have occurred, all of the pesticides, the herbicides, genetic modification, splicing the DNA from one thing into another species. I mean, my goodness, no wonder we're all sick because of all this contamination. And so there is, it's just an untold equation, if you will, of how all of this has negatively affected human health and especially the health of Americans. But I would still argue the average American is way over reliant on animal tissue. You don't need it. In fact, going back to 40 or so there are about roughly 40 nutrients, elements, compounds that our cells need to function properly. These are deemed essential that we have to have for our cells to function properly. We mentioned vitamin D just a moment ago. Again, that's not really a vitamin. We get that from the sun. Then the other two that are not from plants are what? Vitamin B12 and vitamin K2. Those are actually synthesized by bacteria. Folks, everything else is made by plants. That's another thing that drives me crazy about omega-3s, for example. The average American thinks that you can only get omega-3 from what? Fish oil. That is not true. No fish can make an omega-3. Fish eat the algae in the ocean. The algae make omega-3 fatty acids. No fish, no animal can make these essential nutrients. So you are like taking what Mother Nature provides in the plant form, and then an animal is consuming it and it's getting into that animal's tissue, and then you are eating it. So essentially you are still getting it from the original source. You're just getting it sort of in an indirect manner through that animal tissue that these, again, carnivore, paleo, keto crowd pushers are so adamant about, that you can't get it from plants, and plants are trying to kill you, and lectins are bad for you, and all this other nonsense that they spout off that they have no idea what they're talking about.
Now, you said something so important. You were talking about pesticides, genetic engineering, all the different things that are being done to the food supply for a variety of interests and reasons. That's a whole other episode.
Right.
Considering that, unless you can maybe eat local, you can go to your local farmer's market and grab some stuff, but a lot of people can't do that. So that's where I would like to get into some of your research that you have done on supplementation, because people are taking more supplements than ever these days. They've got closets full. That's kind of scary too, because many people are overtaking things. They have no idea how they all interact. You could talk better to this than I could. If you have too much of this, you're going to create depletion of this. So I'd love to get into some of your research on aging, nutrition, and our mental health. So where did you start with this? Where did this appeal and draw come from? And what were some of your first studies and some of your more interesting ones that you're seeing now?
Well, the most interesting thing that I could bring to you and your listeners is the topic of polysaccharides, and especially the ones from aloe vera and rice bran that my colleagues and I have studied now. It's been the last 20 years of my life, roughly. I met a gentleman about 20 years ago by the name of Dr. Reg McDaniel, a pathologist by training from the Dallas area, and we met through a mutual acquaintance at the University of Miami. And Dr. Reg had come into town. He was going to give a lecture on his work, and he starts telling me about these sugars from aloe vera. And I'm like, what? Like, it's like, how a dog looks at you, huh? Like you're trying to figure out what the topic is. Well, he's telling me about all of this work starting 20 years ago. So we're talking 40 years for him now, that he and his colleagues started looking at why these polysaccharides, these complex sugars from aloe vera. Basically, it started out with a story of 8 guys that had HIV at that time. Again, this is back in 1985.
I remember
they're taking this aloe vera product. They have no viral load, and their CD4 cells are normal. Total medical heresy. And Reg, he's running a pathology unit at a hospital in Dallas. He has no idea, and he thinks he's, I guess, being pranked at that time. But fortunately, they would not take no for an answer. And so he and his colleagues at Texas A&M, they started looking into this. Well, what in the world is this polysaccharide from aloe vera doing? And so it led them down a line of research where they were looking at different types of viruses, different forms of cancer. A lot of the research they conducted in the early days were in animals, but nonetheless, they were just getting phenomenal responses in all these different animal studies showing how these polysaccharides were either very anti-carcinogenic or very antiviral. So then fast forward 20 years later, and he and I meet, and now he's telling me about all of this work that he's done up to this point, and I'm still like, I don't have a clue what this man's talking about. And he gets back home to Dallas, and he mails me like a whole box of magazine articles and tapes and books. I mean, just a ton of information, and I'm like, whoa, like I don't even know what to do with all this. And so but the thing that I've always had in my own personality is that I'm kind of a bit of a chameleon. Like, I meet somebody and then I hear their story, and then if it sounds interesting to me and I say, well, how can I apply this in my own life and how this may make sense to me, then I'm very open to it. And we just had a very strong connection right from the start. This is the kind of guy that's intellectually brilliant. He has no social filter, so he doesn't even know how to be like a dishonest person. In other words, he's not like a con man type where he's trying to tell you something to like get something out of you. He's just sharing with you what he knows, and whether you like it or not is up to you. But anyway, he is who he is. And so he was giving a lecture talking about some of his anecdotal work with people with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, and talking about how giving them these polysaccharides had made such a difference in their cognitive function, their physical functioning, their quality of life, of course, helping the caregivers, etc. And there happened to be a lady in the audience who heard this lecture that he gave, and she approached him afterward, and she and her husband had some money they wanted to donate to research, and they just felt so inspired by Dr. Reg's story and what he had accomplished so far. Like, well, what you're doing is incredible. Like, we'd love to help you. We just ask you if we're going to make a gift to please run the study in Alzheimer's disease. And so at that time, Dr. Reg was not affiliated with any university or any research organization. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And he and I had become, again, like very fast friends. And he took me under his wing about all this. And so we ended up running this study with these aloe polysaccharides in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease. Now, again, I don't know, maybe for your listeners, I'll do just a little bit of explanation about this word polysaccharide, because a lot of times I talk about this. And again, usually when people hear aloe vera, you think of what? You think of a topical solution for a sunburn, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I think both of my grandmothers told me when I was a little boy, John, you're a little bit sunburned. Here, let's put some aloe vera on your skin and it'll feel better.
And is that where tequila's from? Tequila, the aloe vera plant?
I don't know. Do they?
I'm trying to remember.
Or do they? They might use guava.
Maybe.
Good question.
Succulents.
Yeah, exactly. Some succulent. I'm not sure. I'm not much of a drinker, but
no, that is what I think. I think of you open up the plant, you rub it on your sunburn. So this is a whole new take you're giving us.
Exactly. But at the end of the day, these things are still sugars. Also, as you well know, for the last at least half century, every time in the media, we hear the word sugar, we immediately think what? Bad, right? Like there's just no possibility or opportunity to think that a sugar could be not only not bad for you, but actually very good for you. And so what I like to try to do is help people break down this really erroneous statement that a lot of people are out there in the world making, and that is all sugar is bad for you. One, it's just not true. Number two, it's actually a very ignorant statement, and I'll give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they're just simply being ignorant. I hope they're not being intellectually dishonest, because the reality is Mother Nature creates 4 different types of sugars. You have monosaccharides like fructose or high fructose corn syrup. That's 1 molecule of sugar. You have disaccharides like sucrose, white table sugar, 2 molecules of sugar. And then you have oligosaccharides. These are 8 to 10 or so of sugar like found in breast milk. These are very important, obviously, for the baby to get from its mother when it's nursing. And then finally, you have polysaccharides, many molecules of sugar. These things are literally thousands, not hundreds, thousands of glucose units attached together by these very sophisticated glycosidic bonds. They're like 5D structures. You literally cannot even draw these things on a piece of paper. But yet they're still sugars. By definition, carbohydrate, saccharide, sugar, that's all generically speaking synonyms for each other. And they are like nothing else in Mother Nature. They are so complex, so coated with information. And this is one of our working theories why these things are so efficacious, especially these from aloe vera and rice bran. But when we consume these things, and this is true for everything, not just for polysaccharides, our genes interpret that information and then they guide our cells and how to function properly. So circle all the way back to this word polysaccharide. Just be mindful of people using the word sugar and how I hope again that they're mostly referring to simple sweeteners that, again, if you're eating those every day, I'd agree, metabolically, that's probably not your best strategy for health.
I say to people, if you think sugar's so terrible, I hope you never end up on intravenous.
Absolutely.
Because a big component of intravenous is sugar.
That's right. Exactly. But anyway, it just for me, like to help people understand context around this word sugar, when these complex sugars, especially the 2 we've studied so much, I would put them up against anything else Mother Nature provides for us for a healing benefit. The only other thing that I think in my view of things that comes relatively close would be curcumin. The issue with curcumin, though, is you have to have it properly formulated because the liver rapidly metabolizes it. If you're just consuming raw turmeric powder, number one, you're getting very little curcumin in that raw powder. And then number two, the liver is going to break it down so rapidly, you're barely going to get any into the bloodstream. But anyway, that's another topic of conversation. We ended up running this clinical trial with this polysaccharide-based formula in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease, thanks to this one family, by the way. I don't think I kind of completely finished the anecdote.
No, we talked about the natural components. It was a form of rice.
So rice bran. So
rice
the bran, you have, for the rice, you have 3 main components. You have the outer husk or hull that's, like almost like cardboard. You can't eat it. It's too hard. So that gets stripped off first in the milling process. The next layer is the rice bran. That's what gives brown rice its color. Unfortunately, 70 to 80% of the rice sold in the world is white rice. The white endosperm, that's the inner layer, the white that gives the white rice its color. That's still very nutritionally valuable as well. I'm not saying it's not, but unfortunately, the bran gets stripped off and typically thrown away or fed to livestock. So we put together the polysaccharides from both aloe vera and the rice bran, and then we add a few other things to it. For example, flaxseed, sunflower lecithin, diascorea, which is a wild Mexican yam, tart cherry, ultra terra clay, N-acetylcysteine, something called inositol hexaphosphate, citric acid, and a little bit of vanilla. And so these were all put together, not in the medical paradigm of looking for one, the one magic bullet, right? That's the pharmacological paradigm, looking for one synthetic material to alter a metabolic pathway to treat a symptom of a disease. That's not the nutritional model. The nutritional model is you provide all the raw materials that the cells need to function properly as guided by the genes to allow the body to repair, restore, and heal itself. And that's an inherent intelligence that we all have that cannot really truly be explained, but yet that's the nutritional model. And so I just want people to be clear. Don't leave this conversation and say, well, Lewis said you could use nutrition to treat disease. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying...
We're definitely not saying that.
No, we provide the raw materials the cells need to function
properly.
properly.
To grow and function.
That's right. And then if you have some health challenge, hopefully the body's ability to restore itself will take effect and return you to homeostasis. And so in our clinical trial of people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease, we put them on this formula for 12 months. We assessed their cognitive function at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. We drew their blood at baseline in 12 months. And then we ended up showing results that were beyond our expectations. I mean, obviously, with what Dr. Reg had already done anecdotally, we were certainly optimistic, but until you actually run a study and run the statistics and actually do something formal, you don't really know how well in the anecdote.
Blood, and you did cognitive testing. So what changes did you see in blood, and what kind of cognitive testing did you see to be able to?
Well, first of all, the people that have moderate to severe Alzheimer's, remember that subset of the Alzheimer's population is basically the group Big Pharma cares nothing about. They've already spent billions of dollars trying to come up with some synthetic chemical to treat that disease, and it doesn't work. So these were the people that almost every time are never included in a clinical trial. And so as you can imagine, the caregivers for our study were so motivated, they were actually very happy that their loved one would be eligible for our study. At 9 and 12 months, we showed clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function according to the ADAS-Cog, which is the gold standard for assessing cognitive function. That's unheard of. You can compare that to any type of diet, any other dietary supplement, exercise, hyperbaric oxygen, red light therapy, acupuncture, sound therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. You go down the list. In fact, I would encourage any of your listeners, go to PubMed themselves, do your own literature search, and try to come up with something that even comes remotely close to that finding. And I was so excited. That for me was like, and to this day still is, the highlight of my scientific career in terms of taking something totally natural, no side effects, no harm whatsoever, providing that to these folks, and then having that kind of response, again, for me was just thrilling. I mean, I was literally on top of the world.
Just out of curiosity, did you have any blinded component with this where placebo could have kicked in, or?
We absolutely did not, Diane, because of the ethical consideration. These are people dying. This isn't hypertension or even type 2 diabetes that you live with 30 or 40 years. These are people with this terrible disease dying. And I even had many of the caregivers told me, if this had been a placebo-controlled trial, I would not have allowed my loved one to be in it.
Can we talk about the aspect of Alzheimer's that I don't think many people know nor understand? That it's the 6th leading cause of death. What is it about Alzheimer's that's killing people when people think, oh, it just means I'm losing my memory?
Because it affects the entire brain. And so a lot of times people conflate memory with cognitive function. Remember, your short-term and your long-term memory are only two components of your entire cognitive function. So you have executive functioning, your ability to manage yourself. You have recall ability. You came home and where did you put your shoes or put your keys, like that type of recall ability. You have orientation. Do you know what time it is? Do you know what day it is? Do you know what season it is? Do you know who the president is? There are lots of different things that go. Processing speed. How quickly can you respond to somebody when someone asks you a question? So there are a lot of different things that go into cognitive function. And unfortunately, the way, at least one of the theories is the way dementia or Alzheimer's works is that it's like a slow, what's the best analogy to use? It's almost like, if you remember, like if you've seen people use like they set up the dominoes to make this track of dominoes and they fall down one by one. So think of this disease as spreading through the brain, and as it's spreading through the brain, it's shutting down all of your different components. That's why at the end, basically the person can't move, can't talk, can't do anything, and everything just shuts down because all those components of the brain that control everything through the central nervous system, they all just ultimately end up shutting down. And then you just die from just shutting down.
Now, I'm curious, you had a phenomenal response from this clinical trial. The population that was involved with it, we won't call them patients, the population that participated, were they able to continue this supplementation after the trial?
So, Diane, people ask me this all the time. I mean, unfortunately, the way research works is you have a budget, right? You have a budget that you pay for the supplies, the materials, the personnel, all the lab costs. I didn't even get to the really cool findings we had at the cellular level yet, but all these things that we have to pay for to run the study. And then when the study's over, when you have, that much left in the account, I mean, unless the people have the money, and unfortunately some of these people were, not very financially well off. I know there were several people who had great responses, and so their families had the money to continue paying for them to keep taking the formula. But unfortunately, when the study's over, I mean, our duty, if you will, is over. I mean, I can't just, start paying people out of my own pocket.
No, I understand that. I meant, is like it a formulation that's available?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so you, at some point, you took this and commercialized it?
Well, can I tell you about the cellular changes first?
Yes,
and then I'll
you
answer that
can.
question? Because I don't want to, because those are very important too, and I don't want to lose those before we move on. But what we showed at the cellular level completely, well, let's say 90% explain. I mean, we didn't have the money in the budget to do images of the brain. So again, we had to resort to blood draws, but we looked at some things that turned out to be so exciting. So for example, over that 12-month period, we showed an improvement in the CD4 to CD8 ratio. That is your ratio of helper cells to cytotoxic cells. That's important for all of us, not just for people with Alzheimer's disease, especially as we cross middle age. That's an overall indicator of how well your immune system is functioning. So very, very important. We showed reductions in inflammation according to TNF alpha and VEGF, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and vascular endothelial growth factor. Again, these are very important proteins to look at when you have some type of chronic inflammation, and we showed reductions in both of those, probably for the first time actually in people with Alzheimer's disease. Those are classically looked at in cancer and heart disease. And then finally, we showed a 286% increase in CD4 cells. Now, these are markers of adult stem cells. 6% increase. We know through other research, not from our lab at the University of Miami, but through other research, CD14s can actually turn into neurons. And so when you put this whole picture together, it is just so fascinating because you have this improvement in your overall immune functioning, which the immune system is like the conductor of the symphony orchestra. It talks to all the other major organ systems to help keep everything in balance and regulated. It's not just our defense against infection. It has a very important role in balancing every other major organ system and then controlling that inflammation and then turning on that adult stem cell production. By the way, these people on average were 79.9 years of age. They didn't just have Alzheimer's. They had depression, they had diabetes, they had heart disease. These were very sick folks at a pretty advanced age. And as you know, our adult stem cell production process, it starts to decline once we hit our 30s and 40s. So again, to ramp that back up at a person almost 80 years of age on average, I mean, like it blew us away.
How many people were involved in these trials?
We had 34 people in this study. So again, I mean, just results beyond our expectation. And we only had, I say only, for those of you who don't know, clinical trials, running a clinical trial is very expensive. We had $150,000 to run this study, which is nothing compared to what Big Pharma throws at their clinical trials of millions and tens of millions and maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars. So when people, criticize our study, I'm like, hey, we pinched every penny and nickel and dime that we had access to run a really good study, and we did that. And we published we have published already, I say already because we may publish more in the future, 4 papers from that study that, again, I would challenge anybody to show me a similar type of study with that level of efficacy. It doesn't exist. It does not exist.
What I find interesting, and I've worked with clinical trials for over 30 years with the FDA, so I'm very familiar with them. What I find interesting is, while it's a small group, it's significant results. And you didn't have any negative impacts. You seem to have had a lot of positive. And, when we're not talking about diseases here or curing diseases or anything, but in clinical trials with the FDA, you have orphan drug status. If it's a group of people that are impacted, and when it comes to Alzheimer's, obviously it's a large group, but there's nothing else out there. Nothing.
That's right.
So to me, it's very fascinating, which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about that. We're getting so close to the end of this recording, and I've enjoyed it so much. There are going to be all kinds of links to learn more about everything you're talking about. Do you have any wrap-up thoughts for us before we close?
Well, Diane, I mean, to your point about small numbers, I mean, we've run studies with even less numbers than that. So, that's not necessarily, numbers are arbitrary. And the law of large numbers says the more you increase your sample size, in this case in clinical trials, the more you should show even more statistical significance. I mean, if we already had statistical significance with 34 people, imagine if we had 2. Oh my goodness, our statistics would be off the chart. They wouldn't get worse, they would get better. But anyway, for me, this work with these polysaccharides is just so vital and so important. And so my mission is to continue spreading the information as much as I can about the value of these things. And, again, the work that my colleagues and I have done. Unfortunately, that was the beginning of the end of my academic career, though, because we published that first paper in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease with all those results that I just mentioned. And then after that, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to get blank checks from NIH and Alzheimer's Association to continue this research. I tried twice with each organization over the next about 3 to 4 year period. You know how much money I got in return? Or how much, not even money, how much interest?
Yeah.
Nothing. Because as you know from your experience with FDA, I can't speak necessarily for what the Alzheimer's Association intention is, but at least in terms of NIH's intention, they want to find some kind of molecule that can be patented to then make a big licensing deal with big pharma or big biotech. You cannot do that with nutrition.
Yeah, this is true. I've seen this many times.
I'm like, the heck with this. I am not spending the rest of my life banging my head against the wall trying to get some bureaucrat to acknowledge what we've done. I had to leave academics full time. I'm still a voluntary professor at the school. I still have my affiliation there with, I do some teaching here and there, and I mentor some medical students. But beyond that, I'm focused on, again, what I do in my business with this formulation and basically trying to give
your company.
So the name of my company is Dr. Lewis Nutrition, and you can go to drlewisnutrition.com to read about all the research, the flagship product that came out of that research. You can find us under all the social media channels under the Dr. Lewis Nutrition handle.
And there'll be all kinds of links below.
And again, this is my mission now. I have a science-based dietary supplement business that is unlike anything else basically in the market. And we didn't even talk about the multiple sclerosis research that was being conducted.
We might have to do this again.
Yes.
Because that's another big area. Well, yes. I am so sorry this has come to a close. This has been a fascinating interview with Dr. John Lewis, and we've been talking about aging, nutrition, Alzheimer's, and things you can do nutritionally to help yourself feel better, maybe even think and remember where you put those keys or those glasses when they're on the top of your head, like mine often are, and I'm looking for them. So I'm personally going to try anything, especially nutritionally, because what you put in is often what you get out. So thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. There are going to be all kinds of links below, so you can find him, follow his company, learn more about what he's doing, which I've personally found pretty fascinating. I'm Dian Griesel. This is the SilverDisobedience Perception Dynamics podcast. Hit subscribe, share, especially this episode with your friends because it's a good one, and follow all the links below. Thanks. See you next time. Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis.
Thank you.
We're moving over to the green room. Don't say goodbye yet.